you found Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott, pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. And a long ways away from here, actually in Costa Rica, is a fellow by the name of Cory Albertson. And hi, Cory, welcome to the program.
Hey, Pastor Kent. Thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, glad you're here. So we're, a two-part program. We kind of start from the beginning and so on. So talk to us a little bit about your family of origin. I see here that you were born in Warsaw, Indiana.
Yeah, that's right. I had a very quite stable Midwest upbringing. Grew up in a two-parent household. My parents have been married for over 40 years now, and they're very strong believers, churchgoers. They raised me in the faith. I was going to a Presbyterian church every Sunday throughout my whole childhood, very actively involved in youth group. And yeah, I guess, no childhood is perfect, of course, but in hindsight, I would say I had pretty close to an ideal childhood and got to live a little bit of life before the internet came around. So maybe Pastor Kent, by the time I'm closer to your age, I'll probably be one of the last people around that can say that I remember life before the internet. But yeah, it was a nice childhood that I would say maybe kind of like all ended around September 11th when I was a senior in high school. Kind of felt like that was like the end of the childhood.
Wow. September 11th. So you were in high school at that point?
Yeah, and interestingly, I thought I would wanted to become an airline pilot, and um, that career choice seemed kind of suspicious at the time. Of course, in hindsight, I could have pursued it, but I ended up going a different direction.
Um, Now you have a younger sister.
Yeah, I do. I grew up with my younger sister, Chelsea, who's 2 years younger than me, and I
Okay.
have an older half sister that's 6 years older than me that I didn't grow up in the same household with her.
Okay. So so then at an early age, it says you were raised a Christian, you attended church youth group, and so on. So you were a regular part of a Presbyterian church for some years, Cory.
Yeah, I would say I had a really strong faith, and I was like a quite a good like model Christian as like maybe around the age of like 12 years old or so. I would evangelize to my friends, and overall probably was on the right track, and and then somewhere along the way kind of went off the right track, and hopefully now I'm a little bit more back on it.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to get to that in more in depth, Cory. Let me ask you about when you went to school, high school. Did you play any sports?
I played intramural basketball,
Okay.
but my high school, it was really large and it was very competitive. The athletics, there were a lot of like really athletic kids in my class, and I wasn't really one of them, so I wasn't the biggest jock at the time.
Okay. All right. Um, so so you're talking about you're growing up in a church. You're very much involved in that with your parents, your family, um, and one of the questions is your early concepts of life and God, and your answer is you go to hell unless you believe in Jesus. That's what you got here, Cory. That you sent me,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
so you were much involved in the church. Uh, as you look back, as you look back now on those early days, do you think possibly you were just conforming to the family and what you experienced? Is that
Mhm.
is that a possibility? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I would say yes to a large extent. um, you know, I don't fault my parents for instilling me with the Christian faith or having me go to church on Sundays. Like, I think they did their best, but now as a parent now myself, I have a 2 year old. I feel I feel some kind of motivation to probably do things a little bit differently than my parents did, and I think your question kind of touches on that, which in my own childhood, I felt like there was a quite a lot of pressure to conform and to um, pray the sinner's prayer, to receive Jesus, all at quite a very young age. And um, of course, hindsight is 2020, but I guess in hindsight, I'm not sure that method like necessarily served me in the long run, because I was doing it because I felt like I had no choice to some extent, which I think later probably led to some rebellion, right, and some desire to figure out quote unquote figure out who I am in a context that took me away from the church. So yeah, hopefully that's a sufficient enough answer.
Well, it reminds me of myself, Cory. Myself and my two younger brothers. My dad took us to church, um, and we went to a Baptist church in Portland, Oregon. Went through the Sunday school, the whole thing. Uh, I suppose we all considered ourselves Christians, but not one of us, myself and my two brothers, Bruce and Gary, never became Christians then. Um, but we thought we probably were, but we weren't. And I became a Christian at age 21. My brother Bruce never became a Christian. My brother Gary became a Christian after he came back from Vietnam. And
Wow.
so I'm kind of glad to hear you say this and bring this up. I know I'm talking a little bit too much, but um, I think it's an important thing to bring up. And just because we've gone to Sunday school and church and all that kind of stuff is not a guarantee that we've actually been born again. It's a question
Mm.
that nobody can really answer, however. But so you were very young. You're with Christians, but then you say here you rebelled against God. Could you tell us about that, Cory?
Yeah, I guess I just became very much like gobbled up by the world as a young adult. Um, Trying to think of where to even begin to tell this story, but uh, I went to a 4 year university, and I think that I was the first person in my family to have gone to a 4 year university, and
And by the way,
um,
you went
I
to
guess that
Notre
would probably.
Dame.
Mhm.
You went to Notre Dame, right, Cory?
I did go to Notre Dame. Yeah, I went there for graduate school some years later
An
for
MBA.
my
You got an
undergrad. I
MBA
went
from
to
Notre Dame,
Ball
yeah.
State.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, no, you're good. Gives me a second to collect my thoughts. So I guess, unsurprisingly, going to a 4 year university that was not a Christian school, I began to drift away from the faith. I realized for the first time in my life, like, wow, nobody's forcing me to go to church on Sunday morning. So I'm just going to stay up late on Saturday and sleep in on Sunday. And, very quickly, I would say, like within the first semester of my freshman year, I fell away from the tenets of Christianity that I had been raised under. Um, Began indulging in sin and whatnot. I, I wouldn't say that I was, the worst ever like undergrad student or anything, but um, I just I adopted the worldly framework, and that happens, right? For people.
So you begin to drift away, move away from your Christian identity, contact with the world, and kind of tell us what happened, Cory.
Yeah, one memory that comes to mind is I read this book by a guy named Sam Harris who identifies as an atheist, and the book was called Letter to a Christian Nation. And the book pretty much just tears apart the Christian faith and unfortunately, when I read this book in my early 20s, um, it made me very angry because I felt that he was making, at the time, what I thought were like sound arguments against Christianity. And um, unfortunately, I wasn't really reading the book with a willingness to defend the Christian faith. I was reading it more from a place of a willingness to abandon it. And so the book was sort of guiding me like once and for all away from God, really. And um, what's unfortunate about that is I felt that it made me really angry. I felt like I had been dealt a bad hand in my childhood by being born into a Christian household and all of these sorts of things. And it it kind of turned me into an orphan, so to speak, where of course I still had my family, but as far as I was concerned, they were worth discarding, and it set me on a path where the guidance that I was receiving as a young man in life was guidance that I was looking to the world to receive rather than to believers in the body of Christ.
Wow, yes, I think that is not unusual. Not unusual. Um,
Mm.
so where did you go after that? What happened next?
I really just went deeper into the world. I guess I was became very preoccupied with making money. Money became my God, where I was focusing most of my energy on, serving and worshiping that particular God. In the Bible, it says, a man can only serve one master. And I had chosen, the God of money as my master. So I spent a lot of my 20s kind of worshiping at that altar, so to speak, and not without any results. At some point, I did, manage to accumulate some amounts of wealth or resources, financial resources. So um, there was some worldly success on those pursuits, but really, at the cost of the well-being of my soul, I would say.
Okay. So how did you make your money?
A couple of different ways, but primarily as a professional poker player.
A professional poker player?
Yeah.
I loved to play
Yeah.
poker when I was a kid. Did it many, many hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My dad taught us all how to play poker. But
Well, it is a great game. There's no denying that.
it is, yeah, I agree. But spiritually, Cory, you began to move in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think spiritually I was just really dead for a number of years in my 20s. I turned to alcoholism and um, different ways of trying to numb or suppress the sort of turmoil that I had put myself into from a spiritual standpoint by turning my back on God. Um, at some point, probably more in my 30s, I started to take more of an interest in New Age spirituality. I guess I had achieved most or all of the worldly success that I had wanted to achieve at some point, but I still felt very empty inside. And thus began my pursuit to try to, in effect, to try to find my way back to God, or to try to make sense of, hey, wait a minute, if I checked all of these worldly boxes that I thought were going to bring me to happiness, why is it that I just don't really feel happy at all? Yeah, that's what kind of turned me into a lot of the new age sort of exploration that I was really quite deep into for a number of years.
Well, what forms particularly were you engaged in, Cory?
The main thrust behind it, to be honest, was psychedelic exploration. I, I did not use psychedelics until I was, I think, about 32 years old, because to be honest, I was afraid to. I was really interested in it, and I would hear people talking about it. I would hear these stories and these trip reports, and I found it all very interesting. But for a long time, I didn't, to be honest, I just didn't have the courage to try it for myself. And, at some point, it turned into something where I felt like I had to do it, I guess.
Interesting that this becoming popular. It's being suggested the using psychedelics for mental and emotional healing. So it's becoming popular. I remember a long time ago And so you got caught up into that at some point. And what was the experience like with psychedelics?
The first couple of experiences that I had were tremendously positive for the most part. Um, it felt like, in some sense, that it had kind of brought me back to life on a spiritual level. Um, so where once I was feeling kind of dead or lost, I suddenly started to feel like I was gaining some traction or getting somewhere. And I guess the unfortunate part of that is that I do think that there's a tremendous amount of deception tied up in psychedelics. And I could say that someone can have a tremendously positive experience on psychedelics. That's certainly possible. And it's also possible that intertwined within that positive experience that there can be a lot of deception or even delusion. And I think in my case, I started to lose my grip on reality a little bit by believing that these largely positive experiences that I was having were actually leading me in a good direction when perhaps they weren't, you know?
Hmm. Perhaps the psychedelics opened the door, served as a kind of a door opener, Cory, to involve in other practices um, that are in the occult world. Did that happen to you?
Oh, absolutely, Kent. Yeah, I had been into yoga, I guess, previous to experimenting with psychedelics. I was practicing yoga somewhat often, and um, psychedelic use, like you said, it tends to lend itself towards getting involved in different types of occult practices. Like for me, I got really heavily involved in studying astrology and tarot cards, you know, different types of shamanic rituals, and yeah, just I kind of felt like somewhat of a tourist within the New Age in the sense that I sampled and tried like a lot of different things and was very curious and exploring with a curious spirit these different things that now in hindsight I regard as, somewhat dangerous to be playing around with so carelessly like I was.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that. It's an area that I work on, and our new book is um, Spiritual Paths to Darkness, and we deal with tarot cards, astrology, all forms of mediumship, the so-called mindfulness, which is mindlessness, and
Absolutely.
ancestor worship and Akashic records, channeling, and so on. And a lot of people are attracted to that because it is spiritual, but it is not the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
It is a
That's
it is a dangerous and demonic spirit, as you know. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of your experiences on that one?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And yeah, it says in the Bible that even the devil masquerades as an angel of light, right?
Right.
And I think that's the deception that, um, for me, like in the early stages of engaging with any of this stuff, like the ancestor worship or the indigenous worship, the tarot cards, the astrology, all of it, I would say that it all seems very harmless, uh, or innocent or fun to begin with, and I think that's where the demonic deceptions are at the beginning, especially at the entry level when you're first starting to dabble with these sort of things. I believe the enemy makes it so that it seems all good. It seems harmless. Like, so someone like me who sits here now talking to you, talking about how it's dangerous, it's demonic, it leads you in the wrong way. We sound like quacks, right? We sound like nut jobs to these people who are engaging, and because in the early phases of engaging with the darkness, so to speak, it doesn't seem like darkness. It seems harmless. It seems like light. And it's taken me a long time, quite a long time, to learn the hard way that it's a false light. It's a demonic light. It's a deception, leading people into a lie and away from the truth.
Yes, indeed. And what people don't recognize that by engaging in that, they've opened themselves up to being invaded by demonic spirits.
Mm.
And this has been my ministry for over 50 years, what we call deliverance ministry. I've done
Hmm.
it by the hundreds and still do it today. It seems spiritual, and it is spiritual, Cory. It's very
Hmm.
spiritual. I mean,
Oh,
you are now aware. You're now aware of the spirituality of it. We just don't understand the nature of it. That's all. So tell us how you began to move away from that a little bit. What moved you away?
well, to be honest, the main catalyst that moved me away from it was I impregnated a woman 2 years ago, and so I'm a father now to a 15-month-old girl, and that I would not trade for the world because it's a wonderful blessing to have a child. But the experience I had with that I had and I'm still having with the mother of my daughter has been very difficult, and this really forced me to question. The Bible talks about you will know them by their fruits. You will know people by the fruits of their path. I had to really start to examine that I was dealing with some pretty rotten fruit in my life that did not match up to the perception that I had of the path that I was walking. Because I thought, I had a lot of, I probably still do have, but I definitely before I had a lot of spiritual pride, bordering on arrogance and this self certainty that I was walking on the right path because I was practicing yoga or drinking ayahuasca or doing all of these different new age things. And yet I couldn't reconcile that if I'm on such a great path, if I'm on such a great spiritual path, why are the fruits or the outcomes that I'm getting in my life really quite horrible and difficult to deal with? And I would say that was the doorway that caused me to come back to seeking the truth.
Okay. Yeah, difficult thing. So now how do you see yourself right now? You consider yourself as a follower of Jesus?
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
you know, to me, it's like, what was I saved as a child when I was growing up in a Christian family? I think maybe I was, but I don't really feel like I really truly became saved until earlier this year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in
Hmm.
less than a year. Well,
Yeah,
that's incredible, Cory. And I got to tell you that you ever show up here, man, we'll go to work.
yeah. There's a lot of work to do
Yeah.
around Marin
Yeah. You
County,
you
is
have
there
you have a
not?
lot of good experience behind you. Um, so um, you're looking forward to being baptized. By the way, we're getting our baptism. We're having a baptism in a month, and we're baptizing a few people. And so I just want to tell you, if and when you can come back here, you want to come back here, Corey, well, you let me know, and we'll do everything we can possible to get you back. It would be a pleasure to have you, man. I got to tell you, because this is the real ministry today. Um,
Mm.
I want to ask you a couple questions. Now, what is your favorite book in the Old Testament?
Wow. My favorite book in the Old Testament. I'm tempted to say the Book of Job,
Okay.
which I think I could be wrong, but I believe it might actually be the oldest book in the Old Testament. Um, I only read that pretty recently, but I was just blown away by the like literary genius of it. I would recommend the Book of Job even to a non-believer, even not in the spirit of trying to convert them. I would say you should just read it because it's an amazing piece of literature. Um, but I love the sort of conflict that takes place all throughout that book and the way that it gets resolved at the end by the voice of the Lord.
Okay. Very good. Very good. How about the New Testament? What's your favorite book in the New Testament?
I'd have to say the Book of John. I run a Bible study here in Costa Rica. It's a men's Bible study, and it's been a real blessing in my life because when I became saved earlier this year, I felt this impending sense of doom around how all of my friends none of them are believers, right? And so I prayed out to God and I said, please, like, I need some believers as friends, ideally men. And that prayer led to the formation of a men's Bible study here in Costa Rica. And right now we're reading through the Book of John in that Bible study, and it's giving us a lot of material to discuss for sure.
Well, great, Cory. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's wonderful. I mean, in John, I think you have your favorite Bible verse.
Yeah, John 14:6.
What is that verse again?
Yeah, it's Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father except through me."
That's right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I just think that's like it's such a concise summary of the gospel. It's like
Yeah.
the only verse you really need if you're really willing to listen.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah. It's interesting for the non-Christian to hear that verse quoted. They think, man, those Christians are so exclusive. Everybody else is wrong. And that's what you'd think earlier. But then after you're converted, then you say, oh, yes, that's right. I can't help it. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by him. Wow, Cory.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So anyway, let's keep in touch, Cory. Let's keep in touch, buddy. Okay. And
yeah. Thanks, Chance. And
anything in closing, Cory, you'd like to say?
yeah, I just really want to wish you tremendous blessings in your ministry going forward, because I lived in Marin. I lived in Mill Valley for some time, and I know that you are literally doing the Lord's work in a place that really needs it. You know, there's a lot of material wealth in Marin, but there's also a lot of spiritual deception, you know, and people who are not following Jesus and following the truth. So I think it's really beautiful that you've been where you're at for as long as you've been there, and it's a pleasure for me to have gotten a chance to speak with you today. So thank you so much.
All right, Cory. Thank you, my friend. We'll keep in touch and be on the lookout for more programs, Why We Are Christians, by going to milleravenuechurch.org. You'll be able to find a lot more programmings and Bible studies. And so we look forward to more. Until then, so long.